Welcome to the Faith to You podcast. I'm Pastor Caleb Schroeder. I'm here with David Polak, and we're continuing our series talking about all of life, all for the glory of God. And what I want to do is I want to interview different people in our church to talk to them about how they integrate God's glory into their workplace and into their family life, how they don't separate the sacred from the secular, how it's all the same. Dave helps out at our church. He helps with our Sunday school on Sunday mornings. He helps direct our ninjas on Thursday night for our Awana ministry. He also is a co-leader for one of our small groups that meets every other week at a home, I think, at a local home.
Usually revolve around homes, trying to keep it in the same place.
Going from house to house. They get together. They usually just talk about the sermon, do some worship, just have some family time together. And he also is a manager for a company, a local company called Filter Systems.
Yes.
And so I want to start out, let's start out talking about a little bit about family. Like, how do you integrate your faith into your family life so that you're the same servant of the Lord at home as you are here at the church on a Sunday?
Yeah. So, definitely... at home, you are going to be in front of people who know you more than most people do.
Yeah.
They're going to see any hypocrisies,
yeah.
Right? They're going to see you at your best. They're going to see you at your worst. Mm-hmm. And, it's something that for someone like me who spent most of my life up until about the age of 35 not being a believer was pretty much cut and dry as far as, well, this is what I am and this is what I'm supposed to do for the family, and you're all supposed to listen to me and take it. And so when you have that many years behind you and then you become saved, certainly a lot of that baggage has a tendency to follow you, especially when things can get a little bit sticky between you and your spouse or you and your kids. I think for some men it can be an issue to where your default go-to is shove it, right? You just force it, right? You're all gonna, and that is certainly not what God has intended for our families or our marriages. And so that is one of the things that I still am working on, and probably will be working on for the rest of my life, because we are human, we are sinners, and it's about picking ourselves back up, recognizing it, asking for forgiveness, right? That's a big thing, and especially asking a younger than teenager for forgiveness. It does not come natural to me. However, I have a new nature too. And so I have that ability to. And so luckily I do have a wife that is very kind, and she means me no harm. And so when you have that kind of spouse there that can come along at the right time and knows you and knows the situation, a gentle touch or a soft voice can do wonders as just getting us back on the right track if we do get on the wrong track. And so, luckily we have a model in the church and within everything that we do within God's community, that if you're there enough, if you're paying attention to what's going on and you're bringing that home and incorporating that into your family, that's our best help right there, is that we have people that we can look up to. And this follows into the discipleship, so get into that family discipleship too, because the number one benefactors of any type of discipleship group that you're in are going to be your immediate family. Right. So, and just being able to learn from other people. And of course, at the top of that is God's word, right? So, again, I don't know of anybody that can spend too much time in God's word. And so there's always room for improvement in there. There's certainly always room for me in my life too as well. And then learning those best time frames when you are trying to manage a family. Like 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, I have nothing left in the tank, but all of a sudden at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm up in 100 miles an hour and the rest of the family's asleep. So what are you going to do at that time? So sometimes I go into work early. Sometimes I'll pick up that Bible, sometimes a combination of that and praying. And sometimes, in all honesty, I'm struggling in that morning and trying to work things out on my own and not starting that day off right.
Yeah.
So, there's a good mix of that.
Yeah,
sure.
a couple of things in your life that have blessed me just in our interaction. You'll email me questions about the sermon. You'll ask me, sometimes to send you like my notes because you're working through it. And so one of the things that blesses me is that you don't leave the sermon in the pulpit. I see you trying to take it home, trying to assimilate it, trying to work through it, and not just for yourself and your family, but with others as well. I love the model that you've set up with your Bible study where you guys go and you don't just say like, okay, there's a sermon, now let's go do it. You talk about it. What does this mean? What does this look like for us? And so a lot of the application for, especially the way I preach, I don't spend a lot of time on application. So I really need people to do that. So I appreciate that you're working through that.
And for an encouragement, you should understand, I've sat under the pulpit of a couple of pastors and you actually do it quite well. And so you have a good, well-roundedness to you. To where you're bringing it home and then you are given some good application. And, it's going to be received differently by different people, whoever the hearer is. But certainly, it's received well.
Yeah.
So we're able to pick up and run with that. And like when we're in our small group, that's an opportunity really where I have a tendency to want to just lead everybody through it. Okay, I've got my long list of notes. I've done my checkups, done all this. And if there's even a pause in anybody talking, my natural kind of go-to may just be, okay, let's just carry it through. And my wife will be like, hey, it's okay sometimes to have some silence.
Yeah.
Just let it be silent. Someone will talk.
Yep.
Even if it gets to the point where they're just speaking because it's too uncomfortable. And so, she's really good at that. Just encouraging me that way. But we have a great small group, and a lot of them, once people start talking, they've got something to say.
Yeah.
And that's when we really get to start to know each other a little bit deeper than just the surface level. And so that's one of the biggest joys. And then just really being able to have that family environment. So all kids are invited.
Yeah.
Starting with breaking bread and leading off with some worship songs. And that gets changed up a little bit. Mike Skoglin and Tiffany usually lead up that for us and do a fantastic job. But that even encourages other. And then we have Clint as a backup. And Andy, my son, has a great voice. And just everybody does a good job. And what I feel like I've seen over the last couple of years is, we kind of refine each other better.
Yeah.
And the hopes is that, someday when people go, hey, I'd like to try to duplicate this, within the church, that they have a group that they can ground, a foundational group, and certainly for help. And then not everybody does everything the same way either. And that's one of the great things about the body is that, I'm not going to do everything exactly the same way that you are. Yeah. And so, if we can help with those foundational points just to get those things through, the groups really seem to flourish. Yeah. So, which is nice. Yeah. And that plays into what we're talking about here, because all of life, all for the glory of God doesn't happen if you're trying to live as an island. If you're just you and your family sort of off in your corner by yourself, you need people constantly calling you back to living for the glory of God, not living for yourself. And if we don't have those voices, if we're not opening ourselves up to them, so having a community that you surrounded yourself with, where you're not just hearing the word, reading the word, you're actually interacting with it, and that speaking the truth to each other, that's like the blood flow between the members of the body that's so essential to our thriving. Right. Yeah. Another blessing I just wanted to point out to you, because I love to have people in the church that I can say, hey, imitate them as they imitate Christ. In our children's ministry, it's such a blessing to have men, and you're a father and a grandpa to kids in our kids ministry here, right? And so you have your kids, you have your grandkids, and they get to see, oh, men are leaders. Right? Instead of, I think that sometimes there can be a tendency in churches to only have females and youth leading with children's ministry. And so it's such a blessing to me to have godly men who are stepping up and saying, you know what, I'm going to lead here. I'm going to lead the children. You also help with our Camp Faith. Yeah. You take time off work and you go and serve at Camp Faith. That's such a blessing to me. We had a really great conversation last year while you were there. So it's a blessing to see you doing that. But let's move into work a little bit. So you work, you're the manager for this
company, Filter Systems. How do you integrate your faith into your work, into what you're doing day in, day out? What does it look like to put your faith on display there?
Yeah, so the first thing that I have is the opportunity every morning to go in and to decide what kind of a boss that I'm going to be, right? Am I going to, I've certainly had my challenges over the last year with a transitionary of a new company buying us out.
Yeah.
And in that, they said, hey, we don't want to micromanage you, we just want to let you run with it. And with that comes a lot of responsibility and a lot of hours usually.
Yeah.
And, there's been some trying nights. A lot of trying nights where I start to wake up at around 2 or 2:30 or 3:30 or 4 and find my mind is just going a million miles already trying to work out problems.
Yeah.
And again, thankfully, Sarah, my wife, we'll talk about these things and she'll say, well, what are you doing with those times? Obviously that those times aren't going away.
Yeah.
So is that possibly God just saying, hey, Dave, wake up? We need to work these things out. So are you going to work them out your way, or are you going to work them out with me?
Yeah.
And it can be very stubborn. I'm a very stubborn person, and my whole life, I've always felt like, and especially before being saved, that's what I did. I figured things out and I tackled them, and then I took all the credit for it, certainly, and then deflected any of the losses, and the failures that were there. And so, but God does call us to be something different. And he says, hey, will you include me in your work as well? That's what I feel him saying to me. And I've had some successes with that. And I've certainly had some failures with that, even recently, where I just, I find myself saying it's either this is too trivial for him, I can work it out, I just need to apply a little bit more effort towards it, or if it's that stubbornness that's coming through saying, no, I'm going to force this through, whatever this issue is. But yeah, so I've had a lot of nights where I just wake up and so I usually end up waking up again about 5:30, and that's about 2 hours before work. So again, there's that second opportunity of the day of like, okay, what are you going to do now? Now you're up, now you're out of bed. Are you going to spend some time with me, or are you just going to continue to mull over these issues at work and just carry yourself into work early and start that way? And it's amazing because, it's almost even in that day, I don't even need a little more time to reflect on it. Those days that I choose not to stop and say, okay, I need time with the Lord, right? Yeah. And just admit to him, I don't have what it takes for this. Those days are always better. And then there's a direct result that my employees get of a benefit of that as well, as soon as that happens. And so, so I'll go into work and then I'll make that decision based off of whatever's been on my mind of who's important today. Yeah. And the nice thing about that is that it even relieves the stress of what does my employer expect of me today? Because the employer is going to expect everything from you the same. Yeah. Give us everything you've got, no matter what the cost. And that's the way it is. Yeah. Now, but we have a loving Father who says, hey, will you trust me to lead you in all of your day-to-day work? Yeah. How will you treat your employees? Will you let me shine through in what you're doing? And that may actually look as simple as an employee coming up and saying, hey, I've got some issues that are going on. Can I have some time off? Well, you can say yeah, or you can say no, we just can't, we have too much work right now. Thanks anyways, try again. I need 3 weeks notice. Or you can take the opportunity to say, hey, why don't you pull up a seat? Because I know it's 8 o'clock and we got things to do right now, but there's something going on with this employee where they're asking for help or they're asking for direction or guidance. And we should be centered on, well, what would Jesus do in this moment? Right. And so allowing for that opportunity just to be able to let somebody be heard, maybe give some good advice. Sometimes there's no advice that's needed at all. They just needed to hear something. Yeah. And so, and then actually being a part, getting up out of your desk and moving along throughout the floor, the production floor, and asking how people are doing. How are you doing today? And not just as you're passing by, but literally stopping and waiting for a response. Yeah. And then being willing to to have a follow-up conversation to that. And then always being ready to share the gospel. We have had the blessings of some people within the church that have come to work for me.
Yeah.
And, I love that opportunity because now we have some unbelievers who are seeing more of a community.
Yeah.
Right. And how do they treat each other, within this group? Oh, they go to work with you. Oh, and they go to church with you too. And, everybody likes to fly off a little bit and come to their own decisions about something. Oh, well, that's a niche group or, whatever that is. And, but to really be able to just work with believers and non-believers with the full knowledge that they know that I am a believer.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's most important, and it's most freeing for me too, because when you are willing to say to anybody, employer, state, any government official, or the person that just is like, what is this?
Yeah.
What is this? What are you all about? That's a great opportunity, and I look forward to those. And that's something that, once I became saved, actually lost 2 jobs over that.
Wow.
Lost, but were taken away from me, I should say, more. And being able to live through that. And so I had a dear friend who actually, I've been in this company now 14 years, and he recognized that struggle that I was having and said, hey, I've got something different over here, and I expect you to share that gospel.
Oh, that's cool.
When those opportunities have.
Yeah.
Right. And so, we can certainly do that in our workplace, and that should go right over to our vendors. It should go over to our customer base.
Yeah.
But what better place than, right there with your own employees.
Yeah.
And they've seen me at my best and they've seen me at my worst. And I've even apologized to them, for some of my unkind words that I may have had in the past. And being able to come back out and say, hey, look, I may be your boss, but I'm a human being.
Yeah.
And what I just said was wrong. I apologize. And so just being able to be transparent. And then just making sure that people understand who you are, that you have been bought with a price.
Yeah. So before we started, you were talking a little bit about how you've learned to redeem your work through Ecclesiastes, right? And it can seem like work is like, okay, I work and then I got to go and do it again, right? And it can seem like this futile cycle. And Ecclesiastes speaks to that. But then it has the answer. It has the key. So share with our listeners a little bit about how you've learned to see your work through the filter of Ecclesiastes.
Yeah. So I just recently read through the book again and was just kind of like, what? Here we have King Solomon who, did a lot, right? Yeah. I mean, and one of the key things is that he asked God for the one thing that he wanted. What do you want? God was ready there to give it to him, and he asked for wisdom, and he certainly got that. It may not have been what he expected, with everything that came about, and he certainly made mistakes, along the way. But one of the things is that here was a man with an extreme amount of power and control, and he was able to perceive whether a righteous person or an evil person, good works and bad works, whatever the case may be. He'd seen it pretty much all. He'd lived through it all. He tried it all, right? And, it can be kind of depressing because you go, well, it's it continues with that motto, vanity, vanity. It's all vanity. It's all in vain. And so he's really trying, I think, to get us, the listener, to come to the one end conclusion, which is the end of the matter in chapter 12, which says, I've come to this decision, and that is you fear your God and you obey his commandments. Yeah. And so when you have that calling, that all 12 chapters led up to that, what we should be asking ourselves is, okay, I need a clean definition of what does it mean to fear your God, and what does it mean to obey his commandments. And so luckily we have Paul that comes along, and he was writing in Romans, that we're to work out our salvation in fear and trembling. So there's that fear of the Lord again. Yeah. And that trembling is, out of reverence, I think I've come to the decision, it's out of reverence for what God has done, even though we didn't deserve it. Yeah. Because I know I really kind of resonate with Paul, because I've done some things that just weren't, they were worthy probably of death. We all have. Yeah. And so I really related to Paul going, well, here's this guy. Yeah. and he was saved.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's work to be done. There's blessings, there's thankfulness for everything that we do. But so what do we do? So we look at, and maybe I can pose this to you and to our listeners, so when King Solomon says, fear your God at the end in chapter 12, fear your God and obey the commandments. Are we talking about an Old Testament viewpoint? Are we talking about a New Testament? Are we talking about something that bridges the two and will always be that way for all of eternity? And, I'd just like to know from you. I have my opinion, which I've kind of worked out, and which is kind of like, hey, the fear of the Lord is just knowing what the Lord has done, what he's capable of, and then my place and where he's put me in light of all that. But what does it mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, you sort of hit on it already. In Philippians 2, it says to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because it's God who's working in you both to will and to do his good pleasure. So actually see fear and obedience both there. So fear and trembling, you're recognizing what I'm doing is not for me. What I'm doing is for the Lord. And that means you're going to do it how heartily is unto the Lord. So the fear and the trembling means you recognize you're going to stand before your Maker on that final day. You're going to answer for the deeds done in the flesh, whether good or bad. And that's for all of us. Like that's for Christians. We stand before God at the bema seat and we answer for what we did. That should cause some fear, some trembling. Now, we're going to be saved. We're all going to be saved. It's just we're going to be saved through fire. And so it's going to burn up all that wasted time, all that wasted energy, all that wasted work. And so you got to redeem that work. And he says, working out your salvation with fear and trembling. Why? Because God is working in you. And so the only thing that lasts through that fire is the works that we do in abject dependence on him. Right? And there you see it. I use that phrase I love so much. When I'm depending on him and not myself, that's the precious stones. That's the gold. That's not the wood, hay, and stubble. That's what endures on that final day. And so as I depend on him, he's glorified. And here's how it all ties together. In work, as you depend on the Lord, you look weird. You look different.
Yeah.
People are going to look at you and be like, you're not like any boss I've ever had before. And it says in 1 Peter 3:15, he says, always revere the Lord in your heart. And then it says this, and be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you for the hope that's in you. Because when you're living with that kind of fear of the Lord and you're working out your salvation with fear and trembling because God's working in you, you're going to look different. People are going to come and they're going to say, tell me about your hope. I love the way that John Piper preaches on that passage. He said, when was the last time somebody asked you about your hope? Like, people should come up and ask you, there's something different about you. What is it? What are you hoping in? We should live so radically in our workplace that people want to know, like, what makes you different? And that's really the core of what you're doing. You're living differently. So people look at you and they say, okay, there's something different here. And it doesn't mean perfect, right? Part of it actually means like you're like admitting I'm wrong. Well, that's not normal. That like, as men, we're supposed to save face, never admit we're wrong, right? So all of a sudden you're humbling yourself in front of them. Jesus is seen through you, and we do our works before men. Why? So they'll turn and glorify our Father who's in heaven. And so that's really how Ecclesiastes is worked out in the New Testament. So there's no difference. That fear of the Lord, it's the same all the way through. It's the same God all the way through. It's the same way that we're saved all the way through by faith in him.
Now, would you say there's any difference in the second part of that, which is obey his commandments? Are we talking about, after the Sermon on the Mount? Is that what we look towards? And was King Solomon even referring to the Old Testament commandments, which is, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder? Yeah. Or are they both? Valid?
So I mean, like when you get into the commands, all of the commands are summarized in this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second, love the Lord as yourself, right? That's it. That's the whole law and the prophets, right? Everything is summarized in that. So like Solomon gets that. I know he gets that. He understands that's the core of it, is loving God and loving people because you love God. That's all of it. Now, when you go through it, ceremonial laws aren't necessary for us anymore because of where we're living. But the moral code that's demonstrating a love for God and a love for my neighbor, which we see in the two tables of the 10 Commandments, love for God and love for neighbors, those still apply.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's a different relationship that we have to the, we'd call them the cultic or the ceremonial laws, but the moral code and the principles outlined in the laws in the Old Testament still apply today.
Yeah. The law is still good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
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 Okay. Good.
Yeah. So hopefully that makes sense. That's an excellent question. And I hope that as you continue to work out your salvation in the workplace, you're given opportunities to answer those questions, but also just to love people to Jesus. Something that my grandpa taught me. He said, love people to Jesus. Yeah. And, it's such a blessing. I think it was really important for me to spend a lot of time working in, the secular world to realize it's not the secular world. Right? Abraham Kuyper says there's not one square inch over which the Lord has not declared mine. Mm-hmm. It's all his. And so I had to learn that. I thought, I'm going to be a missionary or I'm going to be a pastor. And God called me to the public school. Mm-hmm. And I had to learn this is his too. And I'm working for him here too. And I had to learn this principle. All of work is for the Lord. Yeah. So thank you for sharing with us today. I appreciate you, Dave. Absolutely. God bless. Thank you so much for listening. God bless.